Learn more at Indeed.com/NPR. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Real ID. We've been hearing about this new form of identification for years. We've also been hearing that everyone will eventually need one, and after years of delay, that time has come. Beginning on May 7th, you will need a Real ID to board an airplane. Real ID is essentially a driver's license on steroids, one you've obtained because you've provided the DMV with additional forms of identification in order for them to give you one. But if you haven't done it yet, do you really have to? Can you, given that you have to interface with the notoriously slow DMV at this point, can you get it done by May 7th? And if you don't get one, what are your options should you need to fly? We take a look at that this hour with Greg Hawko. He is the TSA's Federal Security Director for Douglas International Airport. He joins us along with Marty Homan, DMV Communications Manager, and Richard Stradling, Transportation Reporter for the Raleigh News and Observer. Thank you all for being here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, Greg, let me start with you from the TSA. The idea of Real ID came from the 9/11 Commission in the aftermath of terrorists flying airplanes into the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and into a field in Pennsylvania. The Real ID Act, was passed in 2005 and signed into law by President George W. Bush. That was 20 years ago, and we are now just getting around to making the Real ID, the law, mandatory for flying. What's taken 20 years?
So it relies on each individual state's Department of Motor Vehicles, and I think Marty may be able to explain that a little bit better. And then in 2020, it was delayed again with COVID. But it is time for us now to enact it following, as you said, Congress passed the Real ID Act to establish minimum standards for state-issued driver's license and identification cards. And prohibits federal agencies from accepting, for official purposes, any identification cards that do not meet those standards. Every state now has a more secure driver's license than before the passage of the act.
So the Department of Homeland Security has postponed the rollout of this several times, as you've mentioned. The last time they did so, they cited the problems that were associated with COVID-19 and the backlogs that came as a result of that. And so they set the date for May 7th, 2025, 2 weeks from today. But still, not everyone in the country, a substantial number of people in the country, do not have one. Is the problem a lack of urgency on the part of individual citizens, a lack of information about the need for these IDs, the lack of capacity at state-level agencies issuing these IDs? What's the crux of the problem, do you think, Greg?
About 81% of people that travel through our checkpoints possess a Real ID. And that number has been growing every single day thanks to the work by all of the states. I think a lot of people remember, the delays and that's how long it was going to be. And then all of a sudden, May 7th was 2 weeks from today. And people, I think, thought they had more time, but states have been doing a great job messaging along with our partners at the airport here in Charlotte, the city, and airlines across the country are all pushing and making notifications. So our hope is that number grows every single day. But I think kind of it is surprising that the amount of time people didn't really take it as serious as it was going to finally happen. And we need to, because identification is paramount to security.
Richard, I know you've written many, many articles about this. I'm wondering what kind of response you've gotten from readers on the need for this and the looming deadline. Are people taken aback? Are they surprised by this? Or do you hear anything at all from your readers?
Well, I do. The state started issuing the Real ID in 2017, so 8 years ago. And so basically everybody who got a license in North Carolina, either their first license during the last 8 years or renewed their license during the last 8 years. And licenses are good for 8 years in North Carolina. So basically every driver has had an option to get the real ID. And, close to half of them have chosen not to. The latest numbers, and Marty can back me up on this, is about 4.4 million North Carolinians have a real ID, and close, a little bit less than that do not, and chose to not have it. A lot of the people got it years ago. Like you say, the original in 2017, the implementation day was in 2020. Then COVID happened and it was pushed back 3 times, most recently to this coming May 7th. I also want to point out that May 7th is not necessarily like a deadline. You see that word used a lot. It's only a deadline if you happen to be getting on a plane or going to a federal facility that requires an identification card to get into. If you're not flying until September, or you're not flying until Christmas, you don't need a real ID by May 7th, and you can get one after it. The state will continue to issue real IDs, from now until the end of time, probably.
Marty, Richard made an interesting point that I didn't even think about when I was getting ready for this conversation, and that is the fact this has been available to North Carolinians renewing their driver's license or getting their first license. The real ID has been available for about 8 years, and yet people have opted not to get a real ID when they get those licenses. You may not be able to answer this question, but why would they opt not to get a real ID?
Yeah, it's a great question. Some folks might have trouble getting the documentation together. For most people, it's a birth certificate. If you're someone who's moved from another state and you didn't get that from mom or dad, way back when, and you don't have that, that might take you some time to get. And so that's maybe the most common reason why. But I couldn't have said much of any of it better than Richard just said. People have had a chance to get this for 8 years. More than half of the folks in the state have them, and we're not going to stop producing real IDs. And so that's something that we've been battling, that sort of narrative. People keep saying deadline, deadline, deadline. You can get it after May 7th. And if you're not flying until later, you have time. Okay. And so we're going to do the best we can to get everybody what they need in the time frame they need it.
So real IDs will be required to fly at some point, maybe May 7th, I guess. They will also be required for other purposes, including gaining access to certain federal buildings, not post offices, but certain federal buildings. Richard, tell us what you know about that.
Well, first of all, I want to go back and point out that it's not that you're required to have a real ID. It's that you're required to have certain types of documentation. You can use a passport. And so if you have a passport and you don't have a real ID, if you bring a passport to the airport, that's going to be fine. This is for federal facilities that require an identification to enter. So, most courthouses, federal courthouses won't ask you for an ID to get in, but there are federal facilities out there that require an identification. And if they do, they're going to require either a real ID or a passport or some other. There's a list of other acceptable forms of identification, some of them involved with the military, that you can use to get in. But for most people, it's going to be that real ID, which is their driver's license, which they carry around with them all the time.
Around the country, there has been this rising call for voter ID, and legislation has been passed for requiring people to have identification when they go to vote. Will you need in North Carolina, or in South Carolina for that matter, a real ID to vote going forward, or will a normal driver's license suffice?
A normal driver's license will suffice.
So what else will you be able to do without a real ID? You can drive, you can vote. What else can you do in the absence of a real ID?
Well, I guess I'll let Marty answer that. I mean, it's anything that you can buy beer with, whatever you need to show your identification. It's really just the federal standards, and those are applied at federal facilities and at the TSA checkpoints.
So these IDs are really convenience, it's a certificate of convenience. So, because if you don't have one, you have to have a passport to get on an airplane after May the 7th. So you've already shown that passport to the DMV or other forms of identification, ensuring that's who you are. And as a result, they put a star on your driver's license, and that identifies it as being a real ID at the TSA checkpoints. For years, drivers nationwide have been getting driver's license, and they've been used as forms of identification over time. Up to now, Marty, what forms of identification have been required for somebody to apply for their first license, or when they move to a new state, their new driver's license in that state? What have you been asking people for up to now?
Yeah, it's simply birth certificate has always been something that proves your date of birth.
But then why aren't they all? Then why aren't they all real IDs? If you've given the officer your birth certificate and some form of identification that the address you're giving them is correct, it's actually your address. Why do we need a real ID? What's the difference?
It's more than just the birth certificate. So it's birth certificate, proof of Social Security, and proof of residence. And it's to get the real ID, it had been a requirement to have a second proof of residence to go along with all of those things that we may already have. And so if you're someone who used a different form of documentation to prove your identity or date of birth, then the birth certificate is what we need. And that's what most people who are out there who don't have a real ID and want to get one, well, all you really need to bring in is a birth certificate or a passport to prove that. And that's what we need for you to get a real ID.
But that's not all, because I got my real ID a couple of years ago, and I was in line behind somebody else who thought they had all the materials they needed, and they stood in line with me for a long time, and they got up to the counter, and they were missing some documentation and had to reschedule and come back. So what if you're going to get an appointment to get a real ID, or even walk in and stand in line to get a real ID, so you don't make a mistake and have to do it all over again, what must you bring, Marty?
Birth certificate. You no longer need to bring in the physical Social Security card. You can tell us your Social Security card. The most common thing that people don't realize is that we need the original birth certificate. You can't have mom or dad, take a picture of one and email it to you. That doesn't work. We need the original one with a raised seal on it, typically. And if you've had a name change, that's another one that trips people up. If they've had a name change, we need documentation, original documentation, getting from what you have on your birth certificate to what you're saying your name is now. We need to be able to trace the name changes. And so that's an original birth certificate, not a copy, a court decree for a divorce if you've had a divorce. So you need the documentation to sort of trace all of the name changes.
Or a marriage license, correct? Marriage license?
Yeah.
And then I understand, do you still require two current documents that prove your address, like a utility bill or something like that?
Yeah, that's correct. And for someone who has a driver license, one of those, you also need to be able to show proof of insurance. And so that printed proof of insurance can sort of kill two birds with one stone, proving you have insurance and also proving your residence.
When we come back, we're going to talk about how enforcement will be rolled out, because it may be rolled out differently in certain parts of the country, and a critical need for staff at the DMV, which supersedes all of this conversation about real ID. That's part of the reason why people don't want to go there. It just takes so darn long. We're coming right back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
On the next Charlotte Talks, the race for a seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court didn't end on Election Day. It continues despite two recounts, which showed incumbent Allison Riggs to be the winner. But her Republican challenger won't let go. Both are in the middle of a court battle in which Jefferson Griffin wants votes thrown out. The outcome of the race could set a precedent, so we look at where things stand and what's at stake tomorrow morning at 9.
I'm Robin Young. With global temperatures rising, arid countries need new sources of drinking water. That's why researchers are looking for better ways to desalinate groundwater.
The majority of water you find in the ground around the world is salty. So there's literally hundreds of millions of people who could benefit from this around the world.
Next time, Here and Now.
Join us for Here and Now later today at noon on WFAE. Support comes from WFAE listeners and Sandstone Health and Rehabilitation, committed to providing comprehensive and individualized services designed to help support the long-term care needs for families across North Carolina. Dedicated to compassionate care for all, sandstonehealth.com. This is 90.7 WFAE.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the need for real ID, which will become necessary to board an airplane beginning 2 weeks from today, May 7th. Greg Hawko is with us. He is the Federal Security Director for the TSA at Douglas International Airport. Marty Homan is Communications Manager for the North Carolina DMV. And Richard Stradling reports on all this for the Raleigh News and Observer. You also read him in the Charlotte Observer. Marty, WBTV reports that South Carolinians may be able to order their real ID online if their DMV has the required documents already on file. Would that apply in North Carolina as well?
Not at this time. No, you need to appear in person at the DMV in North Carolina to get a real ID.
Greg, I read that.
That's to get your first real ID, is it not, Marty? I mean, if you're if you're coming around now, it's been 8 years, you have a real ID, and you want to renew it, you can now do that online.
Yes, that's correct. You can, just like any other credential, driver license, whether it's real ID or not, you can renew online every other time.
Okay. So if you've already taken the steps to get your real ID, when you renew your real ID, all those documents are unnecessary because it's implied in the actual ID that you hold. Greg, I read that the TSA will be. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, we have those documents on file. They're in our system. You've shown them to us already, so we don't need you to bring them in each time.
Okay. So I read that the TSA, Greg, will begin to roll this out on May the 7th. ABC News says that the TSA is planning a 2-year phased enforcement, which will allow passengers without real ID to board with a warning notice. First of all, is that accurate?
So, yes, passengers who do not have a real ID or another form of acceptable identification can expect to face delays, though. There will be possibly additional screening, and there's a chance where they may not be able to be allowed through the checkpoint. Our goal is to get everybody through, but I do recommend, if you do not have a real ID driver's license or any one of the other, to get to the airport early, especially as the numbers are still growing in the first couple of months and as we enter the summer travel season. But Richard touched on it earlier. I think it's also very important to note that it's not just a driver's license. There are other items that people that have a passport card, a DHS Trusted Traveler Card, Global Entry, Nexus, Sentry, a Department of Defense ID, including those IDs issued to dependents, a permanent resident card, a border crossing card, any acceptable photo issue ID for tribal nations, a foreign passport. Any of these are acceptable forms. There are others as well, but there are a lot of other identifications that will allow you to come through the checkpoint. So adding those or having them with you will speed your time.
So if ABC News is right in saying that you are planning a 2-year phased enforcement, will that enforcement process or the approach to enforcement be the same at all checkpoints, the same at all airports, the same in all states? Or is it going to be kind of up to the individuals who run those particular checkpoints or those particular airport facilities for the TSA? How does that work? So
nationwide, we will all be working the same process. What that looks like at each airport may be different. It depends on the amount of real estate that's available in the security checkpoints. You may receive additional screening right while you're getting your identification checked. Others, you may go into the checkpoint. For us here in Charlotte, we've developed a plan that's going to make it as efficient and effective as possible for all of the traveling public, so that people who have compliant IDs are not impacted. So I think the process will be the same. It's just going to look a little different, and where extra screening is conducted.
So, Richard, the TSA will begin enforcing this on May 7th. If you don't have a real ID in North Carolina, getting one at this point may be a challenge. It may take you a while. We all know that wait times at the DMV are legendary and are evidently so bad, Richard, that you reported this week a bill was approved by a House committee to allow North Carolina drivers 2 extra years to get their licenses renewed because of the backlog. Well, first of all, tell us more about that. And if you really have a dream, a hope, a wish to get a real ID, what does that mean for you?
Well, they shouldn't affect each other. I mean, it's a bill designed to if people are coming up against their deadline for renewing their license and they can't seem to get in, it's to try and relieve that anxiety about not being able to get an appointment to go to a DMV. And this is assuming you have to go to a DMV. A lot of people are able to renew their licenses online, so it's not clear to me exactly how many people this would affect. But if you want to get a real ID, you probably need to go in person anyway, and so that bill is not going to help you. It's not going to relieve any kind of the need to have a real ID if you're going to be flying at a certain time coming up in the future. It is an indication of the frustration that people feel about the long lines and the long waits and the lack of appointments at DMVs, and so that has bubbled up in many different ways at the General Assembly, and this is just another version of that.
So, Marty, this bill that I just referred to has been described as a stopgap measure that does not fix the problem. And I guess the real question here for a lot of people who have to interface from time to time with the DMV is, what is the problem? Because it's much easier to do what needs to be done for driver's licenses, et cetera, in South Carolina and other states, just as I'm sure it's more difficult in other states than in North Carolina. But what's our problem here?
It's a numbers game. Population has grown rapidly over the last 2 decades, while the number of employees in the offices has not kept up. And so that would be the number one issue that we're facing. And so, our folks that are working in the offices are doing the best they can to serve everybody that comes. But there's still people at the end of the line each day at several places that can't be served. And we wish we could. We just run out of time. There are only so many time slots in the day, and we just can't get to everybody. So we're hopeful that the legislature will add some employees to help us keep up.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance to respond to a criticism of the DMV levied by Rowan County Republican House member Harry Warren, who said this bill that will let me go back to the bill here. The bill will approve 2 extra years to get driver's licenses renewed. The bill, he says, will provide a 2-year grace period, would basically be facilitating the incompetency of the DMV by alleviating them of their responsibility of their job. What's your reaction to that?
I don't know that I really have a reaction to that. This extension that you're talking about isn't anything that the agency asked for, and so it's not. We typically don't comment on pending legislation, so I'm not.
Former DMV commissioner, your former boss, Wayne Goodwin, insisted to lawmakers last year that the lines aren't long and the wait times aren't long because the DMV does not have awesome employees. It's because it doesn't have enough employees. How short are you, if you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that statement. I would also correct you, let you know that Wayne Goodman is still the commissioner of the DMV.
Okay.
He is the commissioner until a new commissioner is named. So just so you're aware of that. So we currently have 2 asks before the General Assembly. One would be to add 61 employees, and for locations that have more workstations than we have full-time employees. So sometimes to the customers out there, you might walk into an office and see an empty workstation. That is because we don't have a full-time employee to put in that workstation. We have more workstations than FTEs in our budget. And then a second ask is for 24 new employees to staff 2 new offices, one in Cabarrus, one in Brunswick, I believe, and one in an expanded office in Durham County. And that we still probably wouldn't be enough, but we got to start somewhere. And so we're hopeful that the legislature will see fit to fund those additional positions. A lot of people have the misconception that that DMV can just hire more people and open new offices. That's not how state government works. We can't just hire new people and open new offices. We need to have funding to do so. And the legislature, they're the ones that have to create the position, fund the position, and provide funding for new offices. And so that's something we hear that every single day from customers, whether they're reaching out online, whether they're in the office, telling us, why don't you just hire more people? Well, the fact of the matter is DMV's staffed up pretty darn well. Our vacancy rate coming out of COVID was in the 30s. We're down around 10% right now, which is very good for a large organization. It's the lowest in DOT. It's among the lowest in all of state government. And so we're doing a good job of filling the positions we have. We just need more.
Richard, clearly some people in the legislature know this. That's the reason for the extension on driver's license renewals. I'm sure people in the legislature hear from their constituents all the time about how long it takes to get things done at the DMV. So if they're aware of this and it's an irritant to constituents, why haven't they done something about it?
Well, they know that there's a problem at DMV, and they hear from their constituents about that. I'm not sure that they have caught on to the staffing issue yet. I mean, during that House committee meeting where they approved that extension, there was a lot of discussion about that they didn't understand what was going on, why there was a problem. They were sort of speculating about the culture and speculating about just bad management and things like that. But nobody talked about the fact that they don't have enough people, and which surprised me. And I mentioned that in the article that I wrote about the bill. Somehow the discussion about whether to add people has not really come to the fore at the DMV.
Well, I think this is the article you're referring to. You mentioned that the idea to hire 61 additional people at offices in the Triangle and in Charlotte at the DMV was included in Governor Josh Stein's proposed budget. We all know the governor's budget under the current legislature is dead on arrival, but it was not in the House, the Senate version, which passed last week. Is it in the House version, and might it end up in the final budget that the governor will be asked to sign?
Well, the House version, we haven't seen the House version yet. They're still working on that. I understand from my colleagues at the State House that it will be sometime in May. I'm not hopeful that it will be in there, but because, like you say, it's a request that came from the governor. And there's still a belief that there's somehow that DMV can become more efficient or better managed, and that will fix the problems. But I'm not sure that they're taking the staffing issue seriously at the General Assembly yet.
And actually, Marty, when you brought it up, 61 people does not sound like a lot of people at all these DMV offices scattered throughout the state, given the growth of our population. According to Richard's reporting, our population has grown by 31% since 2003. 2.6 million people are here that weren't here then, yet the DMV has only been authorized to open three new driver's license offices with no additional examiners. So would 61 people make things demonstrably better?
I think that would help, but it might not be enough. But we got to start somewhere. I don't think you can expect to go to ask for a couple of hundred. There are some improvements that can be made sort of internally with DMV, some efficiency, some tweaks to statute that would help DMV be more efficient and folks to not have to come in person as often. That would help. But the biggest item that we've identified is it's a numbers game. We just can't keep up.
So given
isn't that 61 based on the number of terminals that you have that are empty?
Yeah, that's correct. The 61 is, yeah. So over time, we move into different offices and maybe we have more room to add a terminal and that sort of thing. And so we do that sort of thing, and we've tried to fill those terminals with temporary employees, but we have a really hard time filling temporary positions. They're only 11 months out of the year. They don't have any benefits. They do the same job as the full time. Our vacancy rate among temps is about 80%. And so that's really not working. That is not a solution. That's what has been offered in the past as a way to sort of fix and help out, but it's just not working because we can't fill those positions. And so DMV's request is to take that funding that we have for temps that we can't use because we can't fill the temp positions, and that would partially offset filling 61 full-time employees to fill a workstation.
So given that government agencies at all levels, including the federal level, have to deal with the realities of federal budgets and how money is allocated by people higher up the chain, Greg, is TSA, the people at the airports checking our luggage, are they fully staffed, and how have they been impacted, if at all, by DOGE?
So our team here in Charlotte, we've been fully staffed. We've been planning. We plan all year for the summer with the peak travel. So we are above, right at, or one or two above our staffing allocation. We have not been impacted. Our team continues to provide world-class security every single day. And, the focus on national security positions and public safety positions has really stopped us from being impacted. And, we are here for the traveling public every single day. So there's been no impact to us.
We have a question from Chris and Charlotte. Given the realities of the DMV problems, what's the best strategy, Marty, for online scheduling to get a real ID? Is there a good time of day to check? It's literally, he says, a click and a refresh, and if the appointment was available a second ago, it may be gone the next. Is there a strategy to employ here?
So just let folks know about the scheduling. We schedule 90 days, up to 90 days in advance. And they're limited. We just take appointments in the mornings. Every afternoon from 12 to 5 is nothing but walk-ins. So that's the current setup. We release new appointments for that new 90th day out just after midnight each night. Now, if the 90th day out is a Saturday or a Sunday or a holiday, there's not going to be any new appointments that are added because we're not open on those days. Any appointments that go unconfirmed are canceled by the customer. Those become available within 5 minutes. And so that's sort of gives you an idea of when appointments might become available.
When we come back, we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty of real ID when you get to the checkpoint at the airport with Greg Hawko, who is the Federal Security Director for TSA at Douglas International. Marty Homan is with us from the DMV, and Richard Stradling, who is the transportation reporter for the Raleigh News and Observer. We're coming right back at Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
Coming up at 10 o'clock on 1A, a blockbuster antitrust suit brought by the Federal Trade Commission is threatening to break up Mark Zuckerberg's and Meta's $1.5 trillion empire. Monday marked the first day of the trial, so we take a closer look at what the chances are of the suit being successful, and is Meta a monopoly? We'll also look at what the consequences of this trial could be. That's in 20 minutes on 1A.
Are you tired of sifting through countless news articles and sponsored posts to find the stories that matter about Charlotte? Well, we've got a solution for you. Newsworthy, the daily news podcast from WFAE. We share the top stories every morning, saving you time and keeping you informed. Subscribe to Newsworthy, available now everywhere you get your podcasts.
Leave a lasting legacy with a planned gift to WFAE. Many supporters include WFAE in their will or trust to help us continue delivering the news you trust across the Carolinas for years to come. Whether it's for a specific program or to give us the freedom to respond to new needs, your planned gift will shape the future of WFAE and our region. Learn more about making a legacy contribution at wfae.org/support. Thank you.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFAE.org. We're talking about TSA's need for a real ID beginning May 7th, which is 2 weeks from today. The deadline has been 20 years in the making, and it's about to arrive. Greg, as we've been talking, Greg Hawko is with us. He's with the TSA in Charlotte. Those wanting to upgrade their current license to a real ID, or those getting their first license and who want to make it a real ID, have to do so in person. And of course, we've been talking about the backlog in Charlotte, in North Carolina, because of a lack of personnel, and they're making appointments up to 90 days in advance. But those appointments do, in fact, fill up quickly. So is our state the only state that faces this problem? And has the federal government and the TSA taken that into account as we approach and surpass the deadline?
So, I mean, I know that there are states that have a higher percentage than others, and across the country, we are averaging about 81% of the people that come through every single day. So this is not a North Carolina exclusive issue. This is across the country. So we're prepared for it. We've been working over the last few months and developing a plan to ensure the seamless operation. So we are ready. This is not a Charlotte or a North Carolina specific issue.
Well, I ask because CBS News reports that most states, are not yet fully compliant. Despite the 18 years people have had to prepare for this, CBS found that at least 16 states are less than 50% compliant. 28 states are less than 70% compliant. That means as many as 3 in 10 travelers on May 7th will not have a real ID. What will that mean for delays at the airport beginning on May 7th?
Yep, absolutely. So as I said previously, it's going to be important if you do not have a real ID compliant driver's license or another form of identification, you get to the airport a little bit earlier than you were used to. We have, luckily in Charlotte, we've just opened a brand new security checkpoint that has helped increase our capacity by more than 600 passengers every single hour. So that really helps us in giving the additional lanes the ability to spread out the passengers will significantly reduce any impact to all of the public. So people will receive a portion of the people will receive extra screening that may take a little bit longer.
Do you think, obviously Richard and I know about this because we follow the news, and you know about it because you're involved in this, but do you think that people are going to show up on May 7th or May 8th or May 9th or May 10th to fly and be completely surprised?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There will be people who were surprised. I mean, every single day we get hundreds of bottles of water through our checkpoints that have been not allowed for a similar amount of time as when they started the Real ID conversations. And we still get it every single day, and people say they don't know. So yes, I believe that we will have people 2 weeks from today that have never heard of Real ID. But we will continue to educate. We will give them a notification that will include a QR code to allow them to review what a Real ID is and why. And I think that's a portion of it is people. It's been so long. A lot of people don't realize where Real ID came from. It was based on a recommendation from the 9/11 Commission to help raise the level of identity assurance and to help protect the American citizens. The 19 hijackers of 9/11 had 30 separate driver's license and identification cards on them. And identification verification is fundamental to security.
I want to come back to that in a second, but Richard, as of mid-April, The South Carolina DMV says about 62% of drivers in that state had obtained a real ID, but in North Carolina, that number stood at the time at 51%. Do we understand why that discrepancy exists between these two states?
I can't speak to the discrepancy, but I mean, Marty said that, obviously there are folks who maybe couldn't get the documentation they needed when they wanted it. But I think there are probably a lot of people who just chose not to get a real ID. And, I don't know what percentage of the American public flies, but it's not 100%. I mean, and so probably some people made the calculation that, look, I don't fly, and I'm not expecting to go to a federal facility that requires an identification, and I don't need a real ID.
So Greg, to be very super clear, after May 7th, beginning May 7th, if you do not have a real ID and you're going to get on an airplane, what must you bring to the airport?
If you do not have a real ID, we will still accept another driver's license. However, you will receive additional screening.
And what will that include? I mean, how if you don't have identification that's quote unquote real because it's not substantiated by a birth certificate or a passport, which was also substantiated by a birth certificate, what's the difference between May 6th and May 7th?
We're here to ensure that the law is enacted, and when that time comes, we are going to enforce it. What it looks like for somebody that's coming through, it's not going to slow them down for a significant amount of time, but they will receive an extra screening. It'll be on a random, continuous basis. And depending on how many people arrive at the same time, it may be different for everybody. But
how long do you plan to be nice about this or understanding about this? In other words, May 7th may be a shock to the system for a lot of people, but by May 7th of 2026, are you going to be as nice about it?
I think time will tell on that as further policy discussions are happening in DC. Our hope is that every day, and as there has been more and more media over the last 6 weeks and growing for the next 2 weeks, our hope is that every day that number rises and that people continue to search out to get a real ID. And I think one of the other things is that we're using the number of people that show up every single day because we have been counting the number of driver's licenses that are real ID or not. There is also a large percentage of the population that have passports that do not bring them on their everyday domestic trip because it's another thing to carry or lose. So adding in people who then just bring a passport, I believe that that number will go up from the 81% that we see on a daily basis that are compliant, and that the impact to the entire traveling public will be limited.
So I take it that a good rule of thumb is that if you do not have a real ID, but you do have a passport and you intend to fly, bring the passport with you, even if it's a domestic flight, because that's a form of acceptable identification, correct?
Yep, absolutely. If you do not have a real ID driver's license, that is definitely something that you should do. Or if you have a DOD Department of Defense ID, a military ID, those are acceptable too. And we know we have a large population of those folks in North Carolina.
So a lot of people, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. A lot of people think that a lot of the precautions that we have been taking since 9/11 when preparing to board an airplane, like taking off your shoes, taking off your belt, taking your laptop and your other electronics and putting them in the bin, making sure that you don't carry containers of liquid larger than a certain size, are nothing more than window dressing, show business to make us feel safer. Are they wrong?
Absolutely, they're wrong. All of those things that you just spoke about are following real events. We had Richard Reed and the attempted shoe bomb, and then shoes came off. We have had the liquid plot on the transatlantic from England that started the liquid ban. Even going back further to before TSA or before 9/11, there were events that occurred with contact solution bottles, right, and liquid. So every single day, we're stopping prohibited items from getting on the airport. We stop guns at an alarming rate. Charlotte is in the top 10 in the country in firearms for the first quarter of the year, and as those numbers continue to grow, even though there has been so much messaging about firearms, and what our officers do every single day keeps people safe, and they receive significant amounts of training to successfully keep prohibited items and dangerous items off aircraft.
Explain to me how a real ID makes travelers safer. We already ask for driver's licenses when we come in. How does a real ID make us safer? Because you don't know from day to day what a person's going to do in their lives.
Yeah. So Real ID helps us ensure verification. They are harder to reproduce. They have much more stringent requirements to receive one. And I previously said, a perfect example is the 9/11 hijackers had 30 different separate driver's license or identification cards among them. And for us, knowing who's on an airplane and verifying that they are the people that bought the ticket is a major part of what we do. And one of our many layers of security is verifying people who are flying.
You've referenced the 9/11 hijackers twice. So let me ask you this. Since they were the impetus for this, had Real ID been in place at that time, would that have thwarted that attack?
I can't say that it would. There's the rules, the prohibited item list, the rules, the process for the vetting of passengers has all changed since 9/11. I cannot tell you that it would. But having that many IDs is definitely a red flag.
Marty, we all know that teenagers have been known to find a way to fake driver's licenses so they can go to the ABC store and get beer or whatever. Is it impossible to, more difficult to fake a real ID than it is a normal driver's license?
As far as I'm aware, the credential itself, the physical makeup of the credential itself is the same whether it's a real ID or not. Just this past year, North Carolina unveiled a new credential that's the most secure credential we've ever had in North Carolina. It's got over 50 security features within it. It's among the most secure identifying documents in the world, and we change what the card looks like every 5, 6, 8 years to stay ahead of the people who try to create the fake IDs and that sort of thing. And so our newest credential is very, very secure.
Richard, if you don't drive, you don't need a driver's license. And there are a lot of people that fall in that category, but they may want to fly. So what do they do? Do they need a driver's license for a real ID? Are there other forms of quote unquote real ID to be obtained?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a state identification card, which you already can get. It looks like a driver's license, but it's not a driver's license. So you don't have to pass the driver's test to get one. But the requirements, the real ID requirements for a state ID are the same as for a driver's license in terms of establishing who you are. And so there are a number of people who may not drive for whatever reason, but have a state identification card.
Greg, children under 18 will not be required, as I understand it, to have real ID when flying with an adult who does have one. In fact, children under 18 are not required to have an identification card of any sort when traveling within the United States. If we really have safety in mind here, is that wise?
Well, so that is the case today, and with somebody that is under 18, a young teenager or a child, they don't have the ability to get a driver's license, and a majority of the United States citizens don't have passports, and they still receive the exact same screening that everybody else does, and we ensure that they do not have any thing that would make an airplane unsafe.
So since getting a real ID requires a birth certificate and possibly a passport or a passport card, Will real IDs eventually replace passports, Greg?
Not that I am aware of. I do not know anything about that possibly happening. United States Customs and Border Protection, I believe, will still require a passport.
Well, so will all the foreign countries that require a
Right.
passport. I mean, the real ID will get you around the United States, but won't get you into Great Britain.
So, Richard, one of our listeners wants to know, and I don't know if you can answer this question, but there's a lot of suspicion about the need for voter ID around the country. But he asks, what is the likelihood that real IDs could be used as a disenfranchisement tool for voters in North Carolina?
Well, I wouldn't think so any more than regular IDs. I mean, I don't think it's an extra layer for that necessarily, because you can get a regular driver's license or regular state issued ID without having to go through the extra requirements for a real ID. So, and a regular license and a regular state ID card will suffice for voting.
And the Better Business Bureau, Richard, is warning folks to be vigilant against scams surrounding real ID. Everything has a scam attached to it these days.
Yes.
They say if you see a website offering real ID without an in-person visit to the DMV, it's probably fake. Have you heard of any instances of that, of people being scammed by that?
I have not, but you're right. I mean, everything has a scam attached to it, and there are websites that look like DMV websites for North Carolina, and so if you're looking for, and this is true for anything that has to do with the DMV, you should make sure that you're on the actual DMV website and not some .com that wants to charge an extra fee to do something that you can do for free, or with a minor fee on the DMV's website.
So, Greg, it all begins May 7th. You say you are ready. If you don't have a real ID, one more time, what should you bring?
You should bring any other form of acceptable ID, a passport card, DHS Trusted Traveler Card, Department of Defense ID, any of those, or come to work extra, come to the airport early.
Okay. Greg Hawko is the Federal Security Director for the TSA at Douglas. Marty Homan is Communications Manager for North Carolina DMV, and Richard Stradling is with the Raleigh News and Observer.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks